taken a beating for engaging in trying to solve hard problems like immigration in a very red state. I think the fact that I'm not married, America can handle it. I sure can handle it.
Well, cheers to that.
Most people know the fiery voice on the Senate floor, but few have stepped inside the private world where Lindsey Graham actually hangs his hat. In the quiet corners of South Carolina, away from the C-SPAN cameras, lies a residence that tells a much different story than the one seen on the nightly news. There is a specific rhythm to his life here, one shared with those closest to him in the place he calls home. Let's step inside the sanctuary he has built far away from the Washington swamp. So, where can we find Lindsey Graham's crib? The Seneca Sanctuary. The drive into Seneca doesn't feel like a trip to visit a power player. It feels like a trip home. Lindsey Graham's house isn't some sprawling, gold-leafed mansion hidden behind a 10-foot iron gate. It's a place that fits the neighborhood. It's a brick home that looks like it belongs to a successful lawyer or a retired colonel, which, in many ways, is exactly what he is. The lawn is usually manicured, but not in a way that feels artificial. It looks like a southern home where someone actually lives. Rare for a famous political figure, right? When you walk through the neighborhood, you don't see a massive security detail blocking the sidewalk. You see a quiet street where the trees provide more shade than the porch roofs. This is the upstate. People here know who he is, but they don't treat him like a celebrity. They treat him like a neighbor who happened to make it big. Inside the house, the decor isn't about flash. It is about comfort and memory. There are items from his years in the Air Force. There are photos of his family. He bought this place because it kept him close to his roots. He didn't want a trophy home in a Virginia suburb. He wanted a place where he could hear the crickets at night. The house has a specific flow to it. It's built for someone who spends a lot of time thinking. You can imagine him sitting in the living room, a television humming in the background, while he checks his phone for updates from the White House. It is a bachelor's pad in the sense that everything has its place. There is a certain loneliness to any house owned by a career politician. The walls are filled with trophies of a life spent in public, but the quiet can be deafening. He has spent decades building a legacy, and this house is the vault for that history. He doesn't host massive, roaring parties here. This isn't a social club, it's a retreat. When he pulls into the driveway after a long flight from Reagan National, you can almost hear him exhale. The weight of the world stays at the gate. The kitchen isn't a gourmet chef's dream. It's the kitchen of a man who probably eats more takeout than home-cooked meals. There is a modesty to the furniture. It isn't cheap, but it isn't Louis XIV. It's sturdy. It's South Carolinian. He has lived here long enough that the house has become a part of his identity. When people ask where he's from, he doesn't just say the state. He mentions this corner of the world. He knows every creak in the floorboards. He knows which window gets the best light in the afternoon. This is where he went after the hardest days of his career. It's where he went to mourn his friends. It's where he goes to plan his next move. The partner in his life isn't always a person in the traditional sense. Sometimes it is the house itself. It is the only place that doesn't ask him for a vote or a favor. It just offers him a bed and a bit of silence. But a house is just a building without the people who define the life lived inside of it. Living as a lifelong bachelor. This is where the story of Lindsey Graham takes a turn that often surprises the casual observer of American politics. When you look at the house in Seneca, you naturally look for the signs of a shared life, the kind of domestic markers that define most men of his age and status. In the world of high-stakes Washington and power, there is an unspoken expectation of the traditional nuclear family, yet Graham has walked a path that is entirely his own. For a long time, the question of his partner has been a topic of cocktail party chatter and political speculation, but the reality is far more grounded in the soil of South Carolina than the rumors suggest. The most consistent partner in Lindsey Graham's life isn't a spouse or a romantic interest in the way most people define it. Instead, it is a deep, unbreakable bond with his sister, Darlene Graham Nordone. To understand the man in the Seneca house, you have to understand the tragedy that forged this partnership when they were just young adults. When their parents passed away within 15 months of each other, Lindsey was only 21, and Darlene was a young girl. He didn't just become her brother in that moment. He became her guardian, her provider, and her North Star. This is the partnership that defines his domestic world. In the hallways of his home, you won't find the wedding portraits or anniversary gifts that fill the houses of his Senate colleagues. Instead, you find the echoes of a man who stepped up to be a father figure before he even knew how to be a man himself. This early responsibility shaped his view of companionship. He didn't have the luxury of a carefree dating life in his 20s. He had a sister to raise and a future to build from the ashes of a family liquor store. This sense of duty translated into a life where his primary emotional investments were his family and his career. When people ask about a partner, they are often looking for a scandal or a secret, but the truth is often much more mundane. Graham has joked about his single status for years, once famously saying that if he were elected president, he would have a first lady by committee. He mentioned his sister, his friends, and his staff as the people who would fill that void. This partnership by committee is how he manages the loneliness that often comes with a life in the public eye. His house in Seneca reflects this. It is a home built for a man who is rarely alone, but often solitary. He has close friends who have been by his side for 40 years, people who have keys to the house and know where the extra towels are kept. These are the people who fill the chairs at his dinner table. In the South, partner can mean many things. It can mean the person you trust with your secrets, or the person who tells you when you're being a fool. For Graham, these partners are the loyal staffers and the childhood friends who still call him by his first name. They are the ones who make the house feel like a home rather than just a place to sleep between campaign stops. Living as a lifelong bachelor in the South carries a certain weight. There is a tradition of the bachelor politician in this part of the country, men who were said to be married to their work or their state. Graham fits into this lineage perfectly. His partner is the state of South Carolina. His partner is the Senate. His partner is the constant hum of the political machine. When he returns to Seneca, he isn't greeted by a spouse, but he is greeted by the familiar silence of a life he chose. It is a life of total independence, where the only person he has to answer to at the end of the day is the man in the mirror. This independence is a double-edged sword. It allows him the freedom to travel the world at a moment's notice, to spend Christmas in a war zone or a weekend at a political summit. But it also means the house in Seneca remains a quiet monument to a life lived on the move. There are no children's toys in the yard and no partner's touch in the garden. Everything in the house is there because he put it there. The partnership he shares with his sister remains the bedrock. She is the one he calls first. She is the one who keeps him grounded when the Washington ego gets too loud. The lack of a traditional partner has never seemed to slow him down. In fact, it might be the secret to his longevity. He doesn't have the domestic friction that wears down other men. He has a singular focus. When he is in Seneca, he is resting for the next fight. When he is in D.C., he is the life of the party. His partner is the ambition that drove him out of that pool hall in Central and into the highest halls of power. It is a companionship that has lasted a lifetime and shows no signs of fading. Yet, even the most driven man needs a place to escape the noise of the crowd. The Washington commute, the quiet brick sanctuary in Seneca, is only half the story. The other half takes place in the frantic, high-pressure corridors of Washington, D.C. This is where the senator spends a massive portion of his life, and his living arrangements in the Capitol are as much a part of his identity as his South Carolina roots. He is a man who exists in a state of constant motion, a commuter on a grand scale, who has mastered the art of living in two worlds at once, without ever fully belonging to either. In Washington, he doesn't maintain a palatial estate. For a long time, the rumors of his D.C. life were almost as legendary as his political maneuvers. He is known for living a somewhat nomadic existence in the capital, often opting for efficiency over elegance. While other senators might purchase historic townhomes in Georgetown or luxury condos at the wharf, Graham has historically preferred more utilitarian setups. At one point, he famously shared a home with other members of Congress, a brethren-style arrangement that felt more like a college dorm for middle-aged power players than a statesman's residence. This choice was deliberate. It kept him close to the work and removed the distractions of managing a second household. The Washington commute is a grueling cycle. It usually begins on a Monday morning with a flight from the Greenville-Spartanburg Airport. He leaves the stillness of Seneca and the familiar sights of Oconee County for the humidity and heat of the Potomac. By midday, he is back in the Russell Senate office building, surrounded by the organized chaos of his staff and the endless stream of lobbyists and diplomats. His home in D.C. is often just a place to hang his suit and catch a few hours of sleep. It is a transitional space. There are no family heirlooms there. There are no personal touches that suggest a long-term inhabitant. It is a base of operations for a man whose real life is always back home in the upstate. This lifestyle creates a unique psychological footprint. When you live in a series of temporary spaces, you become a creature of habit. Graham has his favorite D.C. restaurants where the staff knows his order before he sits down. He has a routine that bypasses the need for a traditional domestic partner. He relies on a tight-knit circle of colleagues who become a surrogate family. These are the people he grabs a late-night steak with after a grueling vote. These are the people who fill the silence of his D.C. evenings. The partnership here is professional, but it is deeply personal. It is a shared struggle for power and policy that bonds him to his peers in a way that a traditional marriage might struggle to compete with. The transition back to Seneca on Thursday or Friday is just as abrupt. He leaves the sirens and the motorcades behind for the winding roads of the South Carolina foothills. This weekly migration is the heartbeat of his career. It ensures he never loses the common man touch that his constituents value. If he stayed in D.C. too long, the brick house in Seneca would become a museum. By coming back every week, he keeps it a home. He keeps the air moving through the rooms. He keeps his seat at the Baptist church warm. This constant back and forth defines his sense of place. He is a man with two addresses, but only one home. Living this way for over 30 years requires a specific type of stamina. Most people would burn out after a decade of living out of a suitcase. But for Graham, the commute is where he does his best thinking. The hours spent in airports and on planes provide a rare window of isolation. In the air, he isn't a senator or a neighbor. He is just a passenger. It is the only time he isn't expected to perform. When he finally reaches his front door in Seneca, the transition is complete. The Washington version of Lindsey Graham, the strategist, the hawk, the debater, is set aside. The Seneca version, the brother, the neighbor, the colonel, takes over. It is a delicate balance, and it is one he has maintained with surgical precision. The house in D.C. remains a secret to many, a functional necessity in a city of vanity. But the house in Seneca is his truth. It is the place where the partner isn't a person, but a history of service and a connection to a community that has never let him go. This drive for order and discipline in his living space didn't happen by accident. It was forged during his decades in uniform. Roots in the Sanitary Cafe. Let's go back to a single, cramped room in the town of Central. This is where the foundation of Lindsey Graham's domestic life was actually laid. His parents, Florence and Millie Graham, ran the Sanitary Cafe. It wasn't a cafe in the modern sense. It was a combination of a pool hall, a bar, and a liquor store. The family didn't just work there, they lived there. For a significant portion of his youth, the partner in his home life was the constant clack of billiard balls and the low hum of mill workers winding down after a long shift. Living in the back of a pool hall changes a person's perspective on what a home should be. It strips away the pretension. In that environment, Graham learned that a house is a tool for survival, and a hub for the community. The Sanitary Cafe was the center of his world. He didn't have a private bedroom with a plush mattress. He had a shared space where the line between the business and the family was razor thin. This is why his current home in Seneca is so modest. He doesn't need a marble foyer to feel like he's made it. He already knows what it's like to have the bare minimum. The lessons he learned behind that counter stayed with him. He watched his father, known to everyone as Dude, navigate the complex social webs of a small southern town. He saw how a business functioned as a community anchor. When his parents died just 15 months apart, leaving him at 21 to care for his younger sister, the Sanitary Cafe was the only inheritance he had. It wasn't a fortune, it was a responsibility. He spent his weekends driving back from college to run the store and make sure Darlene was fed and safe. The partner in his life at that age was a heavy sense of obligation to the memory of his parents. This upbringing created a man who is incredibly comfortable in utilitarian spaces. If you look at the kitchen in his Seneca home, you see the influence of a childhood spent in a commercial environment. It's organized, it's functional. It's not meant for show. He isn't the type to obsess over thread counts or designer wallpaper. He wants a place where the lights work, the roof doesn't leak, and the memories are preserved. The modesty of his adult life is a direct rebellion against the chaos of his youth. He has spent his career building stability because his early years were defined by the sudden loss of it. Even the way he interacts with guests in his home reflects those pool hall roots. He has a way of making people feel like they've just pulled up a stool at the bar. He's quick with a story and even quicker with a joke. He learned how to read people across a green felt table long before he learned how to read them across a Senate hearing room. The Sanitary Cafe was his first classroom. It taught him that home isn't about the furniture. It's about the people who walk through the door. When he finally moved out of that back room and into a trailer, and eventually into the house he owns now, he didn't leave the lessons behind. He kept the work ethic, he kept the loyalty to his town, and he kept the understanding that a home is only as good as the peace it provides. The partner he missed out on in his youth, the traditional, stable family unit, is something he has spent his entire life trying to provide for his sister and his constituents. The Seneca house is the physical manifestation of that quest for stability. It is the reward for all those weekends spent racking pool balls and counting change in a liquor store. The order and quiet he maintains today are a far cry from the noise of his childhood, but they are both parts of the same story, a typical Sunday in the upstate. When the Sunday morning sun begins to stretch over the Seneca horizon, the man in the brick house transitions into a version of himself that most of the country never sees. There is a specific peace that settles over this part of South Carolina on the weekend. For Lindsey Graham, Sunday isn't about policy briefings or committee hearings. It is about the community that knew him long before he was a household name. He steps out of his front door, not into the waiting arms of a spouse, but into the familiar embrace of a town that has watched him grow from a pool hall kid into a senior statesman. His first stop is often Corinth Baptist Church. He has been a member here for years, and his presence in the pews is a quiet statement of his roots. He doesn't arrive with a fanfare of trumpets. He slides into a seat like anyone else, nodding to neighbors he has known since high school. While he has admitted in the past that his attendance can be spotty due to his travel schedule, the church remains his spiritual home. It is where he goes to be reminded of the values that were instilled in him by his parents. The partner in this setting is his faith, a consistent presence that provides a moral compass when the political winds in D.C. start to swirl too fast. After the service, you might find him at a local diner or a favorite BBQ spot like Holt Brothers. He isn't there to give a speech. He is there to eat. This is where the human side of the senator really comes out. He'll sit at a booth, likely alone or with a close friend, and talk about the local high school football scores or the weather. People in Seneca respect his space, but they also don't hesitate to say hello. There is a social contract in a small town. You are a neighbor first and a public figure second. He enjoys this anonymity, or at least the closest thing to it that a famous person can achieve. The afternoon is usually reserved for quiet reflection back at the house. He might catch a game on TV or spend time catching up with his sister Darlene on the phone. These Sunday calls are a ritual, a way to bridge the distance between their lives. Even though they live apart, they remain each other's primary support system. The house feels different on these afternoons. The silence isn't heavy, it's restorative. He uses this time to recharge his batteries for the coming week. There is no one there to demand his attention, no one to argue with over the remote, and no one to schedule his time. Sometimes he'll take a drive through the countryside, looking at the changing landscape of Oconee County. He sees the growth, the new businesses, and the familiar landmarks of his youth. These drives are a form of meditation. They remind him who he is fighting for when he stands on the Senate floor. The partner on these drives is his memory. He remembers the town as it was when his parents were alive, and he sees the potential for what it can become. This connection to the land is what keeps him grounded. It's hard to get too big for your britches when you're driving past the old site of the Sanitary Cafe. The quiet of a Sunday evening in Seneca is the perfect bookend to his week. It provides the clarity he needs to head back into the storm. The partner in politics. To step into the brick house in Seneca is to step into a space governed by the quiet, rigid discipline of a man who spent 33 years in uniform. Lindsey Graham didn't just dabble in the military, he made it the scaffolding of his adult life. From his time as a young active-duty prosecutor in West Germany to his final days as a colonel in the Air Force Reserve, the military was the partner that taught him how to organize his world. When you look at his living room or his study, you aren't seeing the clutter of a typical civilian life. You are seeing the quarters of an officer who knows that how you maintain your space is how you maintain your mind. This military background explains the specific kind of order found in his South Carolina residence. There is a place for everything, and everything is in its place. It is a habit born from years of knowing that at any moment a deployment or a mission could pull him away. Even during his busiest years in the Senate, he would find time to pull short-term reserve duties in Iraq and Afghanistan. This meant his home had to be a ready-state environment. He lives like a man who can pack a bag in 10 minutes and be gone for 10 days. There is no domestic drift in the Graham household. There are no half-finished projects or piles of mail on the counter. The discipline of the Air Force JAG Corps transitioned seamlessly into the discipline of his domestic upkeep. The partner in this sense is a set of core values: integrity, service, and excellence. These aren't just posters on a wall. They are the rules by which he manages his private hours. Visitors have noted that while his home is comfortable, it possesses a certain spareness that feels almost like an upscale barracks. It's clean, functional, and devoid of the sentimental chaos that usually accumulates in a family home. For Graham, this isn't a lack of warmth. It's a presence of clarity. He finds comfort in the structure. He knows where his ribbons are, where his law books sit, and exactly how many minutes it takes to get from his front door to the tarmac. Even though he retired as a colonel in 2015, the rank never really left the house. It is baked into the way he wakes up, the way he prepares for the day, and the way he winds down. The military gave him a sense of belonging to something much larger than himself, a partnership with the nation that filled the space where a traditional family might have been. When he is alone in Seneca, he isn't just a man in a house. He is a soldier at rest, waiting for the next call to serve. This colonel's quarters mentality is what allows him to navigate the loneliness of power with such steady resolve. Legacy of the Graham estate. To look at Lindsey Graham's life is to see a man who has successfully navigated the expectations of the South while remaining a staunch individualist. In a region where the family unit is often the primary currency of trust, he has built a massive loyal following as a lifelong bachelor. This isn't a small feat. South Carolina has a long history of bachelor politicians who were seen as married to the state, and Graham has leaned into this tradition with a grace that few others could manage. The legacy of the house in Seneca, then, isn't about who will inherit the furniture or the yard. It is about the preservation of a specific American story, one that began in a pool hall and reached the highest levels of global diplomacy. When he eventually hangs up the suit for the last time, the brick house will stand as a monument to a man who lived his life on his own terms. There are no direct heirs to the Graham political dynasty, which makes his connection to his sister, Darlene, and her family even more significant. They are the keepers of the personal flame, the ones who know the man who exists when the cameras are off. His partner, in the end, is the state of South Carolina itself. He has spent every waking hour of his adult life thinking about the people of the upstate, the lowcountry, and everywhere in between. The house in Seneca is just the anchor for that relationship. It is the place where the senator becomes the citizen, where the colonel becomes the brother, and where the frantic pace of Washington finally slows down to the speed of a southern afternoon. He has built a life that is full, crowded with friends and allies, even if the house remains quiet at night. As he looks out over the yard in Seneca, he isn't looking at what's missing. He's looking at what he's built. It is a legacy of service, a history of resilience, and a home that is exactly what he needs it to be. The story of where Lindsey Graham lives is ultimately the story of a man who found his place in the world and never felt the need to apologize for how he chose to occupy it. Write your comments below and hit subscribe for more. For now, click that next video on your screen.